Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Tonight, I'm going to be reacting to Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40K, Episode 23, The Cost of Honor, made by a fan with too much time. If you guys want to check out my previous reactions to the other episodes, remember the playlist card is going to be at the top. Just click on it and you'll be able to access them. If you want to check out the original video as well as a fan with too much time's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. Last week with episode 22, A Storm Breaks, Commander 65, aka Bloody Eyes, has been on a relentless charge against Major Lazarus and the Calambrian troopers as they were, getting off a ledge, and they've been fighting on that ledge, both forces, and it was really a back and forth kind of battle. There were times when the clone troops would have an upper hand, and there would be times when the Imperium of Man, regiment soldiers would have an upper hand against the clone troops. And, special weapons were used in that battle. Major Lazarus using a vortex grenade. And of course, we also had the Tempestus Scions coming in to save the day, saving what was left of Major Lazarus and his forces. So he lives to fight another day. Commander 65 does not get his revenge, and he is possibly, being influenced by a chaos god. It's possible. I guess we'll see what happens in future episodes with Commander 65 and see what happens to him. And yeah, that's essentially what was been happening in episode 22. And now let us move forward for 23. 3, 2, 1, go.
My mind is human. My body is manufactured. I am the first of my kind, but I will not be the last. My body is manufactured. I am the first of my kind, but I will not be the last.
The air howled, whistling between blades and screaming past audio receptors as the tech priest soared up. Limbs of steel and cybernetic sinew twitched and roamed, movements precise and predatory as she angled her trajectories, both as she launched herself from one place to the next and as she flew between those places in question. She hit the side of a large steel wall and rebounded, bladed hands extended as she flew past a pursuing Republic trooper borne aloft on a jetpack. Each of her spread fingers tore into the false man, shattering his white armor like she would the thinnest pane of glass, her adamantine digits digging through him without any more than the slightest, most imperceptible drag. Before the trooper's primitive flesh neurons could so much as trigger a burst of panic, she was past him, and the replicate burst apart, almost seeming to pop before falling from the air in a flammable spattering of white equipment and red meat.
Okay. Who is this?
And the domino was not yet done. Around her, Kali's expanded vision enabled her to see nearly all the chambers, the large, tall, rectangular room filled with its titanic hosts of vehicles and war machines. She used these as platforms, running on the tips of blades, scoring marks into ceramite plates and steel alike, and skating on adamantium and air as she evaded the airborne swarm of replicae which pursued her.
Kali Delta.
Spinning in the wind, she pulled her body first one way and then the other, her hip folding unnaturally, and then the same with one of her shoulders, spiraling like a gymnastic deity as the storm of blaster fire that came for her was evaded. Kali Delta had 100 eyes, at least 30 more than her combat algorithms needed, and with them she saw much indeed. Again and again, the volleys of blaster bolts would go off or veer wrongly, losing their target repeatedly as Kali predicted and subverted their attacks.
I think the clone troops have to target the servitor skulls, because those also act like her sensors, her eyes and ears on the battlefield. She's able to see everything because of all of these servitor skulls that she has. They gotta shoot them down. Yeah.
In fact, she had opened her first true maneuvers in the battle with just such a subversion. The Domina had seen Commander Bly before her, had seen him drawing one of his so-called EMP grenade spheres. She observed as his men prepared to open fire to intersect a presumed path towards him, a path she had fully implied she would take until now. But the Domina was hardly inclined to risk herself in such a meager pursuit, and instead of lunging forward, as seemed inevitable to the simple meat minds of the clones, she instead bent her knees in the reverse direction and leapt backward. The priest had watched as the replicae called Bly tossed down his sphere and activated his flight pack, wasting one of his few effective weapons whilst jetting away from her, his bearing sick with fear. The fear of a prey beast before the predator, and she wondered if he had retreated all the way back to his witchling commanders as one of her skulls tracked his route. Even as he fled, Kali launched herself into the men behind her, carefully angling her trajectory to sail under their incoming shots. Like the others, they had assumed she would attack their commander, and so, like the others, they were easy to predict and avoid. Her hands had then met with the weak white shells of her foes, adamantium blades sinking deep and rending the first of her victims apart, though she had vanished from their sight before the struck troopers had even met the ground or died.
Damn, lady.
Already racing across the walls and through the air. In response, their hovering vehicles came forward, using true anti-gravitic technology which somehow negated gravity without redirecting it or forcing gravitic clashes to occur. Kali's mouth metaphorically watered at the sight, and for a few moments she merely danced alongside the zipping, speeding forms of the bike-like speeders and larger yet nearly as agile gun platforms. But their weapons and rate of fire were a fair amount more concerning than that of the flying infantry that now kicked off to pursue her, and she could not justify allowing their continued function any longer.
This shall be worth it when I present my findings before the many eyes of Mars. They shall watch in envy at the wonders I shall bring forth when this technology is known to me. Even that pompous father of all, Belisarius Call, will be forced to bow his head in recognition at the sight of what will be wrought by my own mind.
She thought to herself as she...
Does she believe that she's still going to go back to the Warhammer 40K galaxy? Does she believe that she's still going to go home? Huh. Okay.
She dove like a lance into one of the clone ISP speeders. The priest spun like a drill as she did, and like a drill, the monomolecular edges of her body tore smoothly into the lightweight construction of the craft. The replicae within barely had time to panic and reach for their sidearms, limbs and heads falling to pieces with a few errant swipes of the Domina's precision-guided claws. She leapt...
Kubik, why must you make it so graphic? It's good, but ew.
From that dying vehicle as it arched down, departing just before its collision with the side of a massive metal leg belonging to a nearby knight. Next was a speeder bike, which she did not destroy directly, instead catching onto the front of its long nose and crawling up towards the two clones mounted on it. The pilot sped the vehicle up as the one behind him leveled his blaster rifle and fired from over the pilot's shoulder. Kali did not pause as she skidded forward on all four limbs, her head swiveling unnaturally first from one side and then to the other as she evaded the shot sent down into her. She lunged like a predatory cat, falling on both troopers at once and ripping them apart in mere seconds before bounding forward, still beast-like, and leaping from the butt of the speeding bike, escaping it before it torpedoed itself into the side of the bay wall. She landed heavily on the nose of another bike behind it, jumping off almost right away and exerting a great deal of force into her legs as she did, catapulting the speeder end over end as she bounded up its tumbling course, terminating against the primary barrel of a nearby Baneblade tank. To the credit of the replicae, they absorbed their losses with far less panic than she had anticipated, recovering to give chase in short order, swarming in an attempt to pin her down with their ionized weapons fire. All the while, her servo-skulls spun above them, watching, calculating, and feeding her everything they witnessed. With their aid and her chosen build, striking her was all but impossible, even for the mass of pursuing clones.
Yeah, you know, it's difficult out here for the clone troops. And I don't want to rely on the Jedi all the time. But I just don't see how you guys are going to defeat this lady. If you guys can't shoot down those servitor skulls and you can't put her into a corner and, you know, neutralize her, then, you know, Jedi, please come help. Please come help these guys, because she is literally dancing around them, you know. She's dancing. She's playing games.
That, however, was slowly changing as the Republic's warriors began to take note and adjust their tactics. Kali was yet unaware of the precise science behind the weaponry they called EMP grenades, but she judged the term electromagnetic pulse was either unrelated, misattributed, or a direct lie to mislead enemy technicians. The lethal contraptions were far too effective against too many technologies to be mere EMP emitters. So when the clones who moved to engage her drew them by the hundreds and began to throw, she took the threat with due seriousness. As the Domina began to dodge, speeding backwards in an inhuman reverse run before leaping into the air once more, she began to plan as well.
How many of these things do you guys have? I think you need to first throw them at the servitor skulls. Yeah, you know, destroy those things first.
First, Kali located 43 varied examples of projected activations, tosses, and detonations. From these, she acquired enough data points to accurately predict the average time from activation to detonation, as well as many more tertiary facts. All the while, she kept herself far away from the spheres, even as more and more replicae resorted to the tactic. She was actually a little impressed with them. Their ability to coordinate strategies and pursue goals would be the envy of any proper guard regiment. That said, their naivety was a great flaw in their current doctrine, one they displayed as they attempted to corral her into a corner, intending to dispense with her by narrowing down her ability to escape the wide reach of their grenades.
Yes, that's what I've been saying. Are you telling me that my plan is wrong? I've had too much time. Are you saying that she's going to escape that? Okay, let's see her try.
Soon, her collating was complete, and the Domina danced before them, drawing them in closer and closer, creating clusters of them as they pursued, eager for their illusory chance at victory. She denied them with merciless, mechanical action, leaping forward instead of back as they made their last push before closing the jaws of their tactical entrapment. She spun easily through the hail of EMP spheres, twirling like an old Earth ballerina as each weapon sailed harmlessly by. Kali's algorithmic cogitators quickly drew lines of approach through the virtual space, spearing 80% of the assembled clusters and predicting no sufficiently threatening counter-response from the enemy.
This lady's using cheat codes, okay? She's using cheat codes.
The Domina's calculations now concluded, and all before she had crossed half the distance to her assembled foes. Sparks sprayed as the tech priest propelled herself forward like a magnetically launched core of depleted adamantium-29, colliding into the first cluster of clones like a thrown saw blade being tossed into a rack of hanging fish. Viscera sprayed, and men screamed and died, first from the wounds dealt by the Domina's sudden assault, and then from the friendly fire inadvertently sent into them as the other clones desperately tried to keep a bead on the darting priest. Yet doing so was all but impossible, Kali's speed and predictive sight reducing their chances to the barest margin of possibility. Her cavorting dance of methodical, rapid death continued without pause, and it was not long before the assembled men here were scattering, routing into the alleys created by the super heavy vehicles parked all around them. Even with their formations torn asunder, however, Kali could see that more were arriving every moment, summoned by the crisis she embodied, and the Domina barely had time to create new projections before the replicae began effectively regrouping. She did not waste the time given to her, and pursued the Republic troops with a mechanized zeal born of her algorithmic attack patterns. The sudden strikes of Eldari's Scorpion soldiers, the lunging strides of Kroot Braves, and even the flicker dances of death practiced by the foul Drukhari. Nothing the Magos Domina had recorded in her long centuries of combat was ignored or censured from her combat protocols. The replicae now bore witness to the horrifying, cumulative results of her widely questioned genius. However, and as ever, the Domina's combat effectiveness proved at least marginally more effective than it was questionable. Certainly, the replicae of the Republic began to question it less and less, and though they did not retreat from the single, vaguely feminine-shaped Death Dealer, they did begin to redirect their targeting priorities from her to her swarming servo-skulls. The Domina had been dogging the clones that she had been assailing with such single-mindedness that she lapsed her attention on her drones for nearly 3 seconds.
I'm so happy. Finally, they're doing what I'm advising them to do. Good. Alright, after taking out the servitor skulls, right, hopefully you guys still have more of those EMP grenade ball thingies. And also, I still think, getting her into an entrapment is the best option that you guys have currently. Yeah, I just don't see any other way you guys can, defeat her, because she's moving all around. She's agile, she's fast. So I think the only way is to box her in again. If you guys have any heavy weapons, maybe even like sniper troopers out here on the field, please, they must come here, they must help you guys, and hopefully it can be a headshot, something like that. And also tanks, anything that's got heavy ammunition, heavy firepower, we need it here in this battle in particular. Because this lady is really tough. She's made out of really strong metallic alloys, and you guys need something that can penetrate that armor that she has and just destroy her insides. Yeah.
She paid for this in the form of 8 split and dying servo-skulls, all falling from the air as the first volley went up after them. The act brought to Kali the last and most lethal ingredient that her attack had, thus far, been lacking. Genuine human rage. She felt the hot throb of that emotion as it rose within her mem-locked emotion centers, straining against the counteracting stream of neurotranquilizers her cortical implants began to supply. She cut the responses before they could complete their operations, feeling the heat of her rage waver and then roar back to strength. Being impressed with the soulless replicae was little different from her fascination with deadly Xenos. Which was to say, it quickly vanished in the face of inconvenience, and replacing each of those skulls would prove a major one indeed. Launching herself towards the group that had fired the first volley, she dug into them with abandon, blood slicking servos and mag-locked blades and joints as her butchery began anew. "You cannot go out there," Combier's mother was saying, though not to him. He was grateful for that. The youth had steeled himself for days and days, girding his mind for the confrontation his father had warned him would come.
What's his name? Comvier? Is that his name? Let me just Comvia. Alright.
And yet, for all that, while he felt more than ready to face down the legions of bloodthirsty imps who now occupied his planet, he still trembled at the thought of facing down Venora Tonvolt in a verbal disagreement. His father did not seem thrilled at the prospect either, but being the one upon which the assault fell, he had little choice but to rise to it. He raised his arms placatingly, the plates of his old armor rustling with the motion. They did not fit quite right, which was to be expected of armor meant for a warrior who had lived almost 20,000 years ago. Star Shower, please, listen, he half begged.
Listen? Listen to what?
She snapped back.
Harrod, you are going to get yourself and our son killed. Do you understand that? Killed!
The woman shrilled, black hair a mess around her reddened face. That's not true, Vin. You know it's not true. We are not the only ones heeding the call, and those damned imps cannot fight off the whole planet. Believe in us. We can do this.
Oh yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, I forgot the Jedi, but there was a particular Jedi that called the citizens of Axiom to, rise up and also help defend your planet against the Imperium of Man. So I guess this is some of the civilians, right? Yeah.
We are not alone, the Patriarch of the Tonvolt said, raising the passion in his voice, but to no avail. Venora's eyes misted then, becoming glossy as tears rimmed each. Vin, the man entreated, but she shook her head and turned away. Harrod pursued, following after her as she walked away from him through the narrow corridors of their apartment unit. The soft thud of his boots and the click-clack of her heels were shrouded behind the sound of his words. Please, Vin, be reasonable. How is this any different than what you have already done? You act like there is no danger in sneaking out escaped prisoners from their camps, but we both know that if they caught you doing it, you'd be lucky to join them behind the walls. Despite that, I supported you. I helped you. Now help us. She stopped then and spun around, tears dripping from her chin.
I saw it, Harrod,
she said, voice cracking.
Is this a Famous Times voice here? Wow. Not bad. Not bad at all.
I saw the inside, and that's what you still don't understand. You think I would be lucky to join them? Harrod, you have no idea what you are getting yourself into. These men, the Imperium, they're not human men, not like you and Combeer.
Star Shower, Harrod began.
No, don't do that. Don't try to push aside what I just said. You don't stand a chance, Harrod. You aren't a soldier. I was a soldier, and even I don't stand a chance. You need to listen to me. To face the Imperium is to face death. It's death, Harrod. Whether you win or whether you lose, it's death, 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 death!
She screamed. Venora, we are not helpless. We have the Jedi. We have the Republic. He countered back, and she laughed.
Jedi? You think Jedi can stop this? Harrod, I've seen it! The Emperor, the Angels of Death, it's all true, it's all real! And it will chew you up and spit you out without ever even noticing that you were there!
Harrod crossed his arms, facing down his wife's glare. The Jedi have called for Axiom's aid. You really demand that we not answer them? Now? In this time of need and for our own sake? He yelled back. Again, she laughed, far more derisively than before.
We both agreed not to give Combeer to the Jedi when he was born. What on Axiom makes you think that I would surrender either of you to them now?
Damn it, Vin, we need the... He started.
Wait, so Comvia is force sensitive? Oh, okay.
The answer is no, Harrod! You can get yourself and our son killed if you insist, but I won't help you do it! I won't!
Silence reigned in the time after Venora's proclamation, her husband fuming in his forefather's battle armor, but unable to think of any words that might shift his obstinate wife.
How does he do this with his voice? Like, I'm trying. I can't do it. my voice is just so deep. I'm I can't do it. Hey, you're good. You're good. I've had so much time. You're good, man. Wow.
When the quiet was broken, it was by Combir, not Herod. Mom, do you remember Caliph? He asked softly. She sucked in a fast breath in response and nodded her head. And Togan? And Joffre Ra? He asked. Again, she nodded. Mom, they were all taken, along with Hethin, Langmar, and Jory's entire family. I don't know what happened to Hethin and the others, but Caliph, Togan, and Joffre Ra, they found their shoes in waste site 333 almost a week ago, he said. By the Sapphire Heart, Venora whispered under her breath. She looked towards him, eyes now truly streaming tears. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. He shook his head. I didn't want to tell you yet. I wanted to wait for things to get better, for the burden to lift, he said. Oh, Starshine, she said as she came to him, but he stepped away from her as she did. But Mom, that's the problem. The thing I don't think you are seeing. This Imperium. What they're doing. If we let it go on, if we don't fight or draw a line or something, then things will never get better. The burden will never get lighter. And I will never be able to stop mourning all the people we lose until you're mourning me instead. The young heir said. Combir, no. She started, now becoming the one who pleads. Know what, Mom? We all die. Life does not go on forever. You taught me the reason we fight, the reason we keep the shrines and honor the fallen is because the goal of the fight is freedom. Because the goal is justice. I know that this latest war has been cloudy and that it has been hard to see right from wrong between the Republic and the Confederacy. But this is no longer that same war. And if we choose not to fight, not to give everything we have, we will be dishonoring all the fallen we claim to care about. What good are the shrines to the honored dead if we have no honor? If the causes they fought and died for died here, isn't that a truer death than the ones they have already suffered?
Wow. Well, nice speech, Combir. Yeah, I mean, you're brave. You're brave. Let's see. You know how long you will last in this war. I'm not trying to downplay you. It's just that you guys are civilians, and the Imperium of Man mows down civilians. Like, for them, it's nothing. It's a no-brainer. You know, they will destroy you. No mercy, nothing. They will crush you. They will use their overwhelming force to obliterate you. And I'm just wondering, you know, how long will this belief of yours last with you? Because it's nice to say all of these words, but when you're on the battlefield and when you have to kill, and, you know, when you have to see your own comrades die beside you or in front of you, you know, or by some lucky chance you survive an explosion but everybody else is dead, and you see their body parts on the floor, you see, you know, sprays of blood everywhere. Things change, and what you're thinking of right now might not survive, you know, once you're on the battlefield. But we'll see. Yeah, let's see if the civilians can do something.
Combir pressed. Wouldn't doing that make me worthless in their eyes? Venora collapsed.
They are dead. They are dead. They have no say. their lives, are now with the Force. Whatever feeling that you have or whatever guilt that you might be feeling, that is all up to you and how you feel about it. Don't worry yourself about the dead people. They're not going to say anything. They're not going to do anything. Yeah. They're now living their own existence in the afterlife.
Collapsed then, falling to her knees and weeping, letting her emotions flow from her without remittance or restraint. For he was right, and she knew now that she had no choice. When Vin recovered, her husband helped her to her feet, and together they walked into the section of their abode where they kept the shrines of their many warrior ancestors. Most were little more than placards, hologlyphs, and engraved words, but some held much more, bearing cases containing perfectly preserved implements of their former craft. Not all such objects were fit for service, and of those that were, not all were suitable for modern combat. Yet, even among such relics, treasures persevered. Herod's combat armor was one such item, its case already opened. Now they approached the other, a memorial and weapon case belonging to Venora's side of the bloodline. Tearfully, she pressed her thumb to the biometric scanner and spoke her words, confirming her voice authentication. The case, black and made of Iridian steel, hissed open. She reached in, hesitating for only a moment before withdrawing the contents and handing them back to her son. He took the weapon, almost slumping under its weight. A true projectile firearm, not a blaster. He flicked the activation switch and aimed it away, sighting the weapon. "Be careful," Herod said to his son, and Combir nodded, lowering the hefty rifle. "How
This is a rifle? Yo.
does it feel?" his father asked. Combir smiled in spite of himself. He had never been to a true battle, but he had been to training, and range practice had always been his favorite part since he never seemed to miss. "Feels exciting." Venora frowned, but dried her eyes again and spoke. "Well, it should. It's not every century someone gets to go to war wielding a heavy Mandalorian Ripper gun. I've only got very limited ammunition for this weapon, and anything you hit with it will almost certainly die horrifically. So," Venora began to say, handing him the few magazines which had been in the case.
I like the music. I like how the music and what she was saying kind of made synergy. Yeah, I like that. That was cool.
He snapped one smoothly into place and loaded the weapon. "So in other words, don't miss," he said, his face filling with a confident smirk. Janice, Gala, Farnes, and Sergeant Kalaknorn accompanied Nerva down into the greater maintenance bay, leaving the willowy soldier by the name of Regin behind to hide and, when the time came, operate the turbo lifts from above. They made good silent speed on their rappel lines, using the tall struts of the lift itself to cover their approach, remaining unseen. Once on the ground, they had regrouped briefly, huddling while Gala kept watch, Laz rifle at the ready. "All right. The plan is simple. Janice, you're sticking here. Hide and keep an eye on the lift controls. With any luck, we won't have to signal Regin to use the lift from above, and you can hop on with us as we leave. Farnes, you, me, and Gala are gonna escort our fair lady over here to her chariot. Once inside, we'll hang on tight to whatever we can," said the sergeant. Nerva nodded her head. "Yes, and make sure that if you are holding on to the maintenance handholds, that you aren't touching any of the red or orange ones. If you are, then you might get pinched in half when I begin moving the faithful flame. Look for a single solid piece away from the jointed areas. Once we are above ground, I can stop and make sure you are all in a safe place," she said. "There will be a deployable ladder on the left side of my my knight. If you can get me there, I can trigger it and we can ascend from that spot." "All right, concerns?" Kalak asked, following that with a brief pause in which no one spoke. "Good, now let's get moving. Gala, you're with us, let's go." The short-haired woman nodded without looking, and slid down from her cover, quickly crawling her way to the more concealed area behind the stacked crates where they had been planning, and joined them. The larger Janus remained as the 4 others began their approach, staying low and hugging the sides of the walls as they did. Kalak led the front, Farnus behind him, with Nerva staying in the young guardsman's shadow as Gala lagged slightly behind, covering their rear. They had managed to make it halfway across the room and were kneeling behind a row of large industrial energy filters when the shooting started.
It must be Janus,
Farnus whispered urgently. Sergeant Kalak nodded, but did not turn back, instead waving them forward to rush to the next set of obstructions, a large, bound stack of refurbished coolant pipes. Before he could set off, however, Farnus reached forward and grabbed the sergeant's forearm.
Sarge, did you hear?
He started.
You're throwing damn right I did, and there isn't a damn thing we can do about it. Now move up!
The sergeant hissed back. Farnus clenched his teeth, but nodded and followed, feeling acid in his nose as a recognizable cry of pain echoed just under the dying blaster fire. And then, the shooting started up again, but this time farther away, and not in any direction any member of their squad had been positioned. It took the flustered trooper 8 or 9 seconds for the dots to connect.
Hey, Sarge!
He whispered at the next stop. Kalak didn't respond, shuffling forward on his knees, barrel leading as he scanned to clear their next rush across the open space. They were huddled behind one of the odd Onager Walker tanks utilized by the Mechanicus, a closed set of red doors behind them, branded sealed with red wax.
I think they're shooting at the Magos,
Farnus continued. The answer to his words came not from in front of him, but from behind.
We know she's going to buy us time by distracting them,
said Nerva.
For how long can she do that?
Farnus asked back.
Yeah, well, it looks like she's going to be fine for the time being. So keep moving.
The Knight Mechanicus aspirant shrugged, a look of barely concealed fear streaking across her mostly organic features.
She is a Magos Domina and is well known for her combat adaptations. That being said, there are thousands of replicae in this complex. She'll last longer than any of us, but ultimately she cannot win.
Alright, enough chatter back there. The enemy is moving off, so get ready to...
Sergeant Kalak started to say. He was cut off by the sound of a soft chime, and snapped his head up as the power indicator above the door suddenly lit. Farnus followed his gaze with a jerk of his own, and felt his stomach drop into his bladder, hissing in a panicked breath, even as the door hissed open.
Fulgrim's fragging fire! Ah!
Kalak Norn bellowed as he twisted, armored back against the Onager tank as he and the rest of his squad brought las rifles around to bear, opening fire all the while. Just as the doors slid open, the red flashes of light which flew in were nearly instantly returned with a hail of blue bolts. They were mercifully inaccurate, the replicae having expected their targets to be at standing level. Still, not all was safe, which was demonstrated when the sergeant grunted and was kicked back against the metal of the vehicle behind him as he was shot in the very center of his chest. His limbs jerked and twitched, but he didn't stop firing, even as his aim veered into uselessness. No, the only reason they were able to escape that sudden run of bad luck was provided by Gala. Having been focused and ready, she had been the first to react when the door showed any signs of life, having half expected it thanks to her former life as a ganger in the Underhive. She had hefted her lasgun in one arm and opened fire on full automatic, but given how the white armor of the replicae seemed capable of drinking in las fire, at least to an extent, she made sure to keep her free hand far from idleness. Farnus grabbed Nerva, intending to drag her out of the line of fire, and thus turned just in time to see Gala rip free not one, but both of her remaining frag grenades with a single swipe of her hand. Then, without breaking the momentum of her swing, she used her index and middle fingers to catch the pins, taut and muscular digits yanking them free just before she tossed. The explosives tumbled in the air, colliding with the walls of the passageway behind the previously sealed doors with signature clinks. The younger guardsman marveled at the maneuver, but was hardly surprised. Farnus had noticed that Underhive gangers tended to just be amazing like that. He figured they had to be, or they would have ended up dead long before reaching recruitment age.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite impressive, really. Wow. Underhive, soldiers within the Imperium of Man need to get more credit, I think. If more of them are like her, then definitely. Wow.
The replique masked behind the doors knew well enough what those echoing sounds were, and reeled back before the twin explosions consumed too many of them. As the tunnel belched smoke and sound, Gala rushed forward, grabbing the sergeant and hauling him up, helping him move to proper cover as she chased after Farnes and Nerva. They found some clever shelter and moved in, Gala moving to lay him down against a stack of massive munition crates.
Sergeant,
she whispered softly.
I'm fragging fine. Just get this fucking flak off of my chest.
He struggled to say. Gala nodded and began to work it off of him, getting help from Farnes a second or two later. The chest piece was shattered, and Calic was burned beneath, but the wound did not seem terribly bad, and certainly not lethal. But the sergeant's arms and legs were quaking now, trembling unnaturally, and his eyes were filling with red.
Is this guy ill? Why is he trembling? If the wound is not that deep, why is he trembling so much? Is he ill?
Sarge, what's happening to you? Farnes asked, heart racing as he watched the man's condition continue to deteriorate.
Ionized my pump.
Calac managed to hiss through his tightly clenched teeth. Nerva nodded right away and went to his left side, cutting away his uniform. Sure enough, built into his waist was a mechanical panel, a blood pressure regulator. It was made mostly smooth to avoid snagging on clothing, melded almost seamlessly at the level of his skin. But the sergeant had been right. It was sparking and, more concerningly, bleeding profusely from around the rim of its form. Gala's face tightened, and she spun around, not looking at the sergeant and instead looking back the way they had come, spotting the line of clones issuing out from the now open doorway.
We've got toys incoming. Let's get you on your feet, Sarge,
said the Underhiver.
Give me a moment. I can probably...
Nerva started, but Norn pulled away.
No time,
he gasped, using considerable will to lift his lasgun and hold it steady.
Gala, you and the kid get the priest to her god or whatever,
he said, panting heavily.
I'll buy time.
Gala hesitated, looking back, eyes wide, but she nodded her head stiffly.
Aye, Sergeant, it's been the honor of my life,
she said, voice hard, harder than it normally was.
The cost of honor.
Now get on, move on!
Calac Norn grunted as he shoved himself onto the lip of the containers and braced his weapon against it. The replique were speeding off towards the major disturbance, or at least most of them were. However, not all, and several had decided to cover themselves and make sure their immediate area was clear. Those groups were only seconds from spotting them now.
Sarge,
Farnes began, tears wetting his eyes.
Save him, kid!
The sergeant said, releasing his first volley of fire as they were spotted.
Get that lady to the walker!
He grunted as Gala fired over his shoulder.
Don't cry! Just get out! Make it! Move it! Now!
He roared. At this, Gala tore herself away and grabbed Farnes, nearly pulling him along as he, and Nerva began to run. Calac remained, slumped against the crates, firing on fully automatic and watching the barrel of his lasgun begin to glow and then melt. But he had to keep the replique back, had to keep their heads down, had to buy enough time for... A bolt took him in the shoulder, the force of it sending him back and sprawling onto the ground. His mostly ruined lasgun went skittering from his grasp. The sergeant groaned and flipped onto his belly, mind reeling, shoulder numb, and then burning. Truly burning. But he shoved it aside, ignoring his useless arm and pulling himself forward almost a meter, reaching out and grasping his gun once more. With one arm, he reloaded it, even though it did not need to be reloaded, and even though he did not intend to fire it again. Fumbling with his single working hand, he managed to perform an old trick he had learned decades ago when fighting blueskins outside the sector. By abusing the power settings on the loaded battery and gun, and failing to perform the proper corrections, he began a subtle chain reaction within the weapon. Calac had just finished when a hard, white boot kicked him onto his back. He cried out in pain, his mind blanking in white-hot agony for a second or two, the replique above him having struck him in his bad arm. While he was stunned, they kicked away his lasgun and sighted him down. One of them pressed a button on the side of his helmet and began to speak in mangled but understandable Gothic. "You, Commander, you surrender." Kalak laughed
Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You, Commander, you surrender.
ruefully at the false man and spat weakly.
Damn right.
He croaked. It wasn't just the blaster wound. He had already been dying before he was shot down, and even now he saw darkness eating away at his vision and devouring the capacity of his thoughts. Everything was growing subtle and more distant with every second.
I am the fucking Emperor himself.
He managed weakly. The clone did not seem to take that seriously and turned to the left somewhat, now clearly radioing someone else as he spoke. "Helpless soldier here. We take prisoners?" The replique asked into his helmet. Kalak grinned a red smile at that and spoke his last words, his breath escaping past ruddy, bloody lips only a microsecond before his overcharged lasgun went critical and detonated like an Astartes patterned frag grenade.
I don't.
I guess it's over for the sergeant. Yeah, he fought until his last breath. He took at least one clone trooper with him, and he allowed everybody else to escape to the Imperial Knight. So yeah.
Combeer and Herod were not marching blind. They knew exactly where they were going. The Imperials still seemed to be wrapping their heads around the free information systems that Axiom had borne for thousands of years, and while access to the HoloNet and other obvious information relays had been shut down or prohibited, for every channel the Imps cut, 8 more remained in more subtle fashion. It had been through these hidden communication systems that the Axiomites had begun to organize themselves, once the call to them had gone out. Across every possible channel and method of distance communication, the Jedi Master Ram Koda had called for aid, a call that all knew the Imperium would certainly hear as well. This, combined with the proud military histories of so many on the planet, led to a more coordinated approach to their uprising. Traveling down, they made their way to a hidden meeting place, a bolo field hidden within the metal folds of the Azurine Metrofront complex. Bolo Ball was big in the mid and outer rims, but was barely played in the core worlds, yet required a fair amount of space to play. As such, the area they used was both relatively hidden and out of the way, while also being vast enough to hold many of them. Combeer idly wondered how many other abandoned Bolo Ball complexes had found a second life in this way, as he and his father entered the area, pushing into the crowd of armed and angered Axiomites as they did. From the looks of things here, he suspected there would be many teeming with activity if this one was any indication of the general trend. Already someone was speaking, their voice echoing from the loudspeakers and walls of the large chamber. The 2 newcomers paused to listen. "Those with adequate weapons and equipment, stay to the north of the arena. The north! Everyone without full gear, come down to the southern half for what you are missing. Quickly now, quickly, we leave in 10 minutes. For..."
The guy sounds like he'll be hired in the Galactic Empire, really. He sounds like one of those lieutenants or, commanding officers of a Star Destroyer. Yeah.
Axiom, for the Jedi, and for the Republic! A scattered cheer went up from the crowd, and Combeer was led by his father in the proper direction, clinging tightly to his pack and his rare heavy rifle. The spotlights above the field illuminated the patchwork crowd brightly. Axiomites from all strata of the worldwide city were here, in all manner of attire, armor, and uniforms. Most surprising, at least to Combeer, was the amount of aliens present as well. He was glad for the company and the help, but he had assumed most of them had been rounded up by the Imperium already. Seeing them here brought a smile to his thin lips. The imp's control wasn't even half as ironclad as they like to pretend it was. His father ambled out to meet with some of the more experienced warriors, and Combeer left him to it. The youth was content to let his father coordinate with the others, resisting the urge to draw and sight his Ripper rifle as he found the nearby lip of the field and leaned against it to wait. He was joined a few minutes later by another man, a tall man, thickly built and dressed in a black trench coat which covered work fatigues. He was a member of the lower strata, from the looks of his attire, but his movements were solid, almost mechanical, yet smooth. The man had a small carton in one hand, from which he produced 2 white-rolled sticks of something musky and fragrant. One hand deposited the carton into his pocket, fishing around for something else, while the other was raised to his lips, teeth taking the butt of one of the items. Before long, he raised his other hand, an antique lighter clenched between his fingers. Combeer did not know why, but each movement the man made felt so certain that he doubted Durasteel chains could have prevented him from raising his limb and lighting the smokable stick held between his lips. He turned then and offered the youth one as well. Combeer looked at it for a moment, thinking he'd reject, until he remembered where he was and what he was about to do. He grinned and reached for it. "Thanks," he said, placing the smelly, wrapped weed between his lips, though he had no lighter. The man said nothing, pulling a long drag out of his cigarette and blowing the smoke out into the air. He looked over at the younger man beside him and sighed, offering him the lighter as well. "This isn't a death stick, is it?" Combeer asked. "No," the man said, but did not elaborate.
Is this going to be like your new comrade, in arms, as you guys battle against the Imperium of Man? New friend?
Combeer waited, but then shrugged and snapped open the lighter, lighting the end of his and pulling on it. He pulled too hard, and moments later, Combeer was bent over, hands on his knees and coughing. The older man chuckled, despite the narcotic wasting on the floor, and gave the young Axiomite a few hard pats on his back.
Easy. You'll knock yourself off your feet if you take drags like that right off the bat. Start with puffs. Work your way up,
he said. Combeer nodded, still coughing for a moment longer until he managed to get control again. He sheepishly retrieved the dropped tube then, and placed it back between his lips, though he did not pull again. "Combeer," said the younger man.
"Samael,"
the older man said back. The man's face was dirty, though the white of old scars seemed to peer past the sheen of soot, just enough to make it clear he had been in some kind of accident.
What's his name again? Samael? I'll have to double check all these names. Alright. Yeah.
From the way he moved, the young man wouldn't be surprised if he had already seen real combat as a mercenary or proper soldier. He wavered slightly then, feeling a heady rush enter his mind for a moment, making his heart race and then settle. "So, are you here because of the Jedi?" Combeer asked, blushing slightly even before the man answered.
"Isn't everyone? Doubt anyone would be here right now otherwise,"
he said with a shrug and a sigh. Samuel took another long pull, columns of smoke ejecting from his nostrils a moment or two later before continuing.
"But no, I'd be here whether the Jedi called or not. I've not been waiting for some light stick twirling outsider. I've been waiting for this, and only this,"
he said, taking
Light stick twirling. Wow, okay. I've never heard of someone describe the Jedi like that. Yeah, that's interesting.
what was left of his narcotic tube and gesturing around at the filled field and bleachers before promptly returning it to his mouth. "So you've just been waiting for the rest of us, huh?" Combeer asked. The man nodded.
"Doesn't take a genius to figure out this would happen eventually. I just wish it had happened sooner. But I guess a lot of the planet is used to relying on the Jedi for problems like this, so maybe I can't blame them. By the way, kid, I can't help but notice that rifle you're hauling around. What the hell is that thing?
Combeer instinctively pulled the slung weapon closer, and Samael raised a placating hand.
Easy, I don't use rifles. Just honest curiosity's all. It's clearly not a blaster, so it sticks out in this mob,
he said. Combeer paused for a moment longer, considering the man a bit more before choosing how to answer. Tall and black-haired, with dark eyes that gleamed oddly like obsidian flakes. But what struck the younger man more profoundly was just how large Samael was. Easily 6 feet, with a body wrought in pure muscle. Muscle which flexed and bent perceptibly beneath the taut confines of his clothes. In spite of that, the man seemed unarmed himself, though his trench coat was more than capable of hiding more than one weapon, so Combeer disregarded the observation. All in all, he was not sure if he trusted the man, but he was more than happy to have him on their side. "It's a heavy Mandalorian Ripper rifle," he said proudly. Samael's head tilted.
Doesn't look like any Ripper guns I know about,
he muttered. "Yeah, it's super rare. We don't really know how to make them. Only the Mandalorians might, and if they do still know, they are hiding the fact really well," Combeer said.
I see. That's great and all, but what does it actually do?
The man asked, pulling one last time on his rolled narcotic. He breathed out a scattering breath of smoke and spat the spent bud from his lips before promptly retrieving another. "Well, I guess you'll just have to wait and find out. Stick around and I'll be sure to show you a practical demonstration," the younger man boasted. Samael snorted but did not press the issue further, lighting his newest stick. The two...
Samael looks like someone from the Matrix. with his sunglasses, you know, and just the way he's dressed. He kind of seems like someone who belongs in the Matrix. It's interesting.
Two waited there for a brief time before, finally, Herod began to make his way towards them, a group at his back, and a goal in his eyes. But when Combeer turned to his latest acquaintance, the big man was gone. The only evidence he had been there being the smell of smoke, the butt of his spent stick, the half-burnt, bent stick between his own lips, and the weight of the man's forgotten lighter in his own pocket.
"Let's go, son. We've got a target in mind,"
Herod said excitedly, pausing when he noticed Combeer looking around urgently. "Lose something?" his father asked. Combeer paused at Herod's question, tugging his pack and rifle, finding them both intact and in place still. He shrugged then. "No, just looking for... Never mind. We'll probably meet up later anyway." Farnes tracked the replique as they flew past, soaring low at first as they strafed his cover with blue shots from their long rifles. He didn't even duck like Gala did, getting lucky as the 3 lines of falling bolts narrowly missed him. He did not miss in return.
"Fucking heretics! Heretics!"
The guardsman was screaming, unloading with strobing volleys from his lasgun, sending red lances to chase the 3 jet troopers. The 3 were struck multiple times, though only 2 fell from the assault, one dying quickly as his helmet was breached, sending the airborne body careening limply into the ceiling, while the second screamed and flailed, his jetpack pierced by the shots and sparking, flames erupting from it as the replique lost control, being jerked through the air this way and that until slamming with a thud into the floor. The smoking, surviving third did not forget him, however, looping around quickly and zeroing in on Farnes. The guardsmen met the flying trooper's hidden glare, and they both opened fire, though Farnes was saved from almost certain death by Gala, who seized him by the collar and dragged him back, jerking his whole body after her with a single muscular arm. Because of this, he only lost most of his left ear and not his entire head as the Republic warrior cruised by. Farnes bellowed in pain and cupped his molten ear, Nerva grabbing his arm and pulling it away to examine him a moment later, the movement clumsy and awkward until her mechadendrite moved in to compensate for her useless arm. As she treated him, Gala took over their covering fire, shooting first after the clone that had passed them and then at the ones on foot who were moving to surround them. A few seconds and an injection of stimulant later, and Farnes was back beside her, throwing his fire in with her own. They had made a small U out of spare parts and a few conveniently placed tank treads, and were sheltering behind it to keep from being blasted apart by the replicae who were now moving to flank them. The Imperial soldiers fired from both sides of their makeshift barricades, barrels glowing as they were forced to put out a dangerous level of continuous fire. Farnes tracked another flying warrior and paused as his sight crossed the massive iron face of their destination. They were so close, almost at the base of the night itself, but they may as well have been a million miles away for all the good it would do them now. Gradually, more and more of the white-clad soldiers were realizing that they were there, and already the number of attacking replicae had swelled to far beyond what they could escape from. Doom became a certainty, and it flushed fear and rage in equal portions into Farnes' chest. And then, suddenly and without warning, a new doom arrived, falling into the fighting mass like a razor-tipped torpedo, bringing undeniable death with it. But not for them. It was difficult for the soldier to catch everything that had happened. The sudden end of hostilities and the swiftness of the ensuing slaughter shocked him utterly. One of the fat, two-person gun platforms that the replicae used to fly around on fell, spiraling and crashing into the back of the assaulting enemy force, plowing burning furrows into the ground and grinding into several Republic soldiers in the process.
Is it Major's Dominus?
From its burning wreckage leapt a shape, vaguely feminine in motion and form, every move it made categorized by the need to bring death. The Domina ran on bladed legs, stepping into and through clone soldiers, arms waving as if in an exotic dance, flowing limbs delimbing her enemies as her writhing, spinning form continued to perform its ghastly waltz of death. He blinked and saw images frozen in his mind. The Domina leaping, a duelist's grace marrying machine precision as her performance evolved, the steps shifting even as the murderous rhythm remained the same. He blinked again, seeing her amidst a circle of replicae, arms raised, body bending, the troops around her slowly rising, and in the same moments, falling to pieces, their heads coming free, their legs collapsing away, their arms forming a circle. A grotesque halo falling imperceptibly slow around the frozen shape of the Magos Kali Delta. And then, like the flash of lightning or the searing exit of a teleportarium, she was gone. And the clones all around them were sheared into collapsing giblets of meat and armor. For a few scant moments, all three of the survivors were too shocked to react, Gala actually continuing to shoot mutely into the pieces of the clones around them.
No, guys, snap out of it. Snap out of it. You have a mission. Get to that Imperial Knight.
Now! We have to go now!
Nerva suddenly said, popping her head out from behind the cover and looking around to make sure they were clear. Hearing her words, Gala seemed to reorient on her goal, rising to her feet and bringing Farnes up to his own by unconscious example. Without another word, they rushed for the looming feet of the massive walker. Standing almost 50 feet tall and made in the vague suggestion of an anthropomorphic shape, it glowered silently down upon them through blue, inactive lenses. Nerva sped up and took the lead from them, guiding them to where the chain ascension ladder would come down. She called it down with a data pulse which she transmitted through the remaining new sphere connections she had. Blessedly, the dormant knight responded, clinking from high above and releasing the rattling ladder at her behest. Wishing the damn thing had an ascension function, she took the solid rungs and began to climb the edifice of war, struggling with her single arm, but managing thanks to her robotic limb. Gala came up right behind her, and Farnes was hot on her trail. She grabbed the ladder and began to climb, quickly giving the other guardsmen room to follow, and together the three ascended for almost 12 full seconds before they were noticed again. A spray of blue shots emerged from below them, and though the spattering seemed ill-aimed, it was accurate enough to strike Gala twice in different places on her back. The woman screamed and slumped against the rungs.
Gala! Oh, throne! Oh, burning throne! Gala! Are you alright?
Farnes cried out, climbing up as fast as he could, though Gala appeared to have stopped moving altogether. The formidable guardswoman seemed to hang tenuously from the ladder for a couple seconds, head lolling somewhat, eyes fluttering as she tried to focus, before the soldier began to slide off.
No! Throw, damn it! No, no! He yelled, panic festering in his voice as he clawed his way up desperately. Gala groaned, gripping the bars before her once more, gritting her teeth without any strength as she held on for dear life, but failed. The Underhiver fell backwards, away from the ladder, losing consciousness as she did, though retaining enough to grunt softly as she was arrested from her fall. Farnes grit his teeth, knuckles white as one hand held onto one of the ladder's rungs, while the other gripped Gala's ankle with all the strength he had. He roared, pain filling him as he strained against her weight and the swinging motion of the ladder. He couldn't climb, he couldn't move, he was trapped. Distantly, the Imperial soldier was grateful that no more blaster bolts came for him, and attributed his reprieve to the Omnissiah's agent of wrath. Still, reprieve or no, it was only a matter of time before they were noticed again, and the Domina could not be in all places at once. Let her go! Nerva called down, nearing the top herself, having paused only briefly to glance down at them. No! I can't! I won't! He yelled back. You have to! You'll die otherwise! She tried to reason. No! I won't let them all die! I won't! Emperor, damn me! I won't let them go! He cried, voice breaking, grip slipping. He looked up after her, eyes red, tears running. You have to... keep going! Turn the battle! Save the Imperium! He yelled up after her. Make it worth it! Make it worth us!
No! Let's continue. Let's continue with that. Oh my gosh. Alright.
Kambir had taken his position in one of the empty rooms along the outer rim of the Samtara Center Spire, which was essentially across the street from their target. Even so, when the actual breadth of the crossing was considered, no one could say he was anything better than relatively close. That was why he needed the powerful Trilite scope mounted onto his Ripper rifle. While the original Mandalorian Ripper was never designed for use in ranges greater than several meters, the heavy Ripper rifle, by virtue of its dramatically increased power, was quite capable of making shots at nearly 2 kilometers distance. On top of that, the Aerotech scope it bore was capable of guiding a weapon which could fire at 100 times greater distance than his own. As it was, he was closer than a kilometer from where the action would be happening, and was thus comfortably inside his effective range. Watching with his enhanced vision, he spied on their objective, an Imperial outpost which they had built by this road to help check traffic. Naturally, there was no traffic as of now, and all the men who stood around the octagonal bunker seemed to be on high alert, but it was hardly them he was most concerned with. Beside the bunker was a massive gun turret of some kind, and beside that, a pair of 2-legged light walker tanks. The turret, and others like it, had been deployed to the ground from space, and was some kind of twin-linked slug thrower bearing an absolutely absurd caliber. It seemed to swivel and twitch mechanically, never remaining still for too long, and slowly revealing just how much range of movement it truly had when aiming. The 2 walkers beside it seemed similar to the Republic's ATRTs, but far more heavily armed and armored, each pilot completely hidden from view within. Already the force seemed like a formidable one, and that was not even counting the soldiers visible outside, or the ones who could be presumed to be inside. But regardless, he felt they were ready. In fact, this was not even the real battle. Not really. Not in regards to what they were actually preparing themselves for.
Okay, so if this is not the real battle, why are you guys here fighting at a road checkpoint? I'm not entirely sure whether this is a good idea. I expected them to hit vital key areas of support for the Imperium of Man's main force fighting against the clone troops and the Jedi. Like supply chains or communications, or just try to disrupt the enemy from getting reinforcements onto the front lines. I thought maybe they would try and do that, but a road checkpoint, I'm not entirely sure.
To their west, the so-called Basilica of Salvation was under siege by Republic forces. To the east, approaching in ranks, was a mobilized force of Imperial reinforcements. Their plan was simple: aid the Republic by preventing the reinforcements. Simple. Step 1, take over the outpost. Step 2, fortify it. And Step 3, deny the enemy access. And what's more, in addition to being simple, it was inevitable. The reasons why began to reveal themselves from the surrounding buildings and accesses, moving silently and subtly at first, but growing bolder as their numbers swelled and completely breaking with stealth once the Imperials began to notice them. Tens of thousands of Axiomites had answered the call, and now those tens of thousands were starting to surround the Imperial position. Combeer had half expected the imps to throw down their weapons and surrender straight away. After all, they were hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. That did not happen. Instead, they were the ones to take the first strike and draw first blood. The turret spun and opened fire, the sound of it thundering horrifically as it sent two thick streams of exploding micro-missiles out in nearly all directions. A quarter of the approaching front line of Axiomites were turned into gore paste before Combeer's eyes, and a dull pain pierced his skull above his right eye as he watched. But it was far from done. While the Imperial men ran back into the bunker, chased in by a stuttering hail of blaster fire, the enclosed all-terrain Imperial walkers spun to face different sides of the crowd, each bounding away on flexible, agile legs. They sported two weapon mounts each, a large, repeating slug thrower that could have cleaved a speeder in half with each of its explosive thunks, and a lit flamethrower that seemed to be the size of an entire man. As the turret tore chunks out of the scattering Axiomites, the walkers jumped into the crowds, trampling and stomping down on the rebels in their midst, even as they opened fire.
Man, this is bad. This is really bad.
Wide fans of liquid flames began the horrifying work of filling the air with human and alien screams.
We need that Ripper. We need that weapon right now to fire and destroy these things. Yeah.
Their victims left to writhe and cook as large guns opposite each flamethrower issued out more and more deadly fire. The shots pulped the mostly civilian fighters with strafing volleys of high-caliber steel. He had never seen it before. He had never watched people transform, going from alive, thinking, moving, being, to dead, inert, silent, still. Lively men and women, some he may have known, were walking and shouting in one moment, and then being reduced to meat and slime in the next.
And this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning.
The impact of that, the permanence of it, had never really struck him in any true way until that very moment. This was no game. Those people, more people already than the Imperials had in the outpost, were never coming back. All at once, he felt like he was in way too deep over his head. Why hadn't his mental simulations been accurate? He'd known people would die. He had known. He had thought he was prepared to deal with it. The rebels were not helpless, even as they were laid into by the Imperial outpost forces, and the mass of them were mostly firing as they either charged, took cover, or ran screaming. The hulls of the two agile walkers were even starting to glow slightly orange, pieces of their armor falling away in molten scraps, the air distorting around their armor as the heat from blaster fire was released into their surroundings. But it wasn't until someone mounted and properly aimed a Plex missile launcher that the Imperials really began to feel the pressure they were under. The detonite missile fired from the crowd made a straight line for what seemed to be empty space. The genius of the aim only revealed when one of the two walkers jumped into its path. It exploded twice, First upon impact, as the detonite went critical and blew away most of the pilot's compartment. And then again when the contents of the breached promethium tanks touched the heated surface of the vehicle, destroying what was left. The blast snapped Combier back to himself, and he shouldered his rifle more snugly. He stopped thinking, put off feeling, put off everything. He reached a place then, amidst his panic and duty, a place where only pseudo-thoughts could exist, where there was no consideration, no attempting, no right and no wrong. There were simply two options here, in this simple but clear place. Do or do not. The young Axiomite chose the latter option as he sighted down the remaining walker, which ducked and bobbed around two rockets which were sent blazing its way. The unblooded rebel bit his lip, tracking the thing and waiting for his moment. Now, said a voice from deep within him, and he squeezed the trigger. His Ripper reacted instantly, obediently, even eagerly. The instantaneous triggering of its ionic field making the shot feel like it had left the barrel almost before he had fired it. It was nearly silent, using no conventional explosives as propellant for its ammunition. Inside the barrel of his weapon, a smooth spike of polarized durasteel was instantly charged with an ionic field. The charge naturally pushed both against the spike and the rifled interior of the barrel, adding spin as it ejected its enveloped round from the gun. The overpowered ionic field was meant to do far more than push the ammunition towards the target, and the recoil from the two objects, the gun and the bullet, attempting to separate from each other, jostled his arm painfully as the spike came screaming, whistling through the air.
Is the Ripper gun like a mass driver type of weapon? Is it like a mech, like a mass accelerating cannon rifle? Is that what it is?
It struck the canopy of the vehicle, burning through the relatively light armor and exited out the bottom of the walker, burying itself into the floor beneath. Then, by a delay of only about a second, a round 3-foot hole was atomized into the entire vehicle, the entry and exit points growing as the rims of their initial teeny holes dissolved into metallic dust and ash. Within, all that was left of the pilot were his hands, still clutching his controls, and his feet now light against the pedals below him. The raw power of the Ripper rifle astounded the Axiomites, not least of all the one who had fired the shot. In spite of this, he didn't lose his focus, rapidly orienting to sight down the turret next. His blood frosting over in his veins as he saw that the large chain-linked weapon was oriented in his exact direction. Combier cried out, kicking away from the window of the building and falling back as 4 explosive shots careened into the wall and ceiling around him, bursting open the entire wall and caving in part of the floor above. Still, no more shots than the initial burst came, and
You're lucky.
as Combier groaned and rolled off his back and onto his feet, he found that he seemed and felt completely intact. Swallowing bitter bile and ignoring the urine that had escaped into his pants, he crawled up to the lip and looked down again through his scope and saw why it had ceased firing.
You're still alive. You're still alive.
The turret had been hit by at least 2 additional rockets, and it was left a burning, sparking mess from the resultant damage. Still, it was clearly attempting to function, its mount still twitching and trying to orient itself, still aiming at him. It managed a half-hearted measure and attempted to fire the one remaining weapon it had, the other having been blown clean off. Combier tensed, but found no need to fear as the gun exploded violently a second later, its automatic loading mechanism now damaged, pinching through explosive rounds as it moved them into the gun. He sighed heavily, but decided to take one more shot before the crowd closed in too much around the bunker. He fired his next spike into the now sealed doors of the Imperial holdout, watching with rapt attention as it streaked through the air and collided with the target. The spike struck the doors and bounced off, spinning away and out of sight. A second later, the door began to fall apart, but only so much. The tan exterior of the bunker melted away into ash and sand, revealing a dark gray metal nearly an inch within. A second and third shot confirmed the growing disappointment in the rebel's mind.
Yeah, well, it seems like the Ripper is not, the perfect solution for everything here. So I think you should just conserve the ammo for far more, dangerous targets. Those blast doors, I think, the civilians will figure out how to deal with that situation. Just conserve the ammo.
The matte gray metal was simply unaffected in its entirety. That's about all I can do. Combeer sighed. He shrank back from the ledge of the open apartment and collapsed against the far wall, shaking dust and debris out of his hair. He blushed and frowned as he truly noticed the wet stain in his trousers, pushing himself up with a groan. His father had been down there, somewhere, though he had faith that Herod would have known well enough to stay back from the front. Thinking otherwise was not something he allowed himself to do. But as eager as he was to confirm that his father was safe, he put it off for now, looking around instead. Gotta be a change of pants somewhere up here.
We are back.
She hated this. She really hated this. Nerva climbed one rung after the other on the chain link ladder, pulling herself up in awkward, lopsided bursts, one arm useless, the other supplemented by her tendril of steel. Below her, the guardsmen were all dying. In fact, they may have already been dead. At that realization, a profound guilt flooded her senses, and no safe nerves could be muted or numbed in that moment to prevent it. This was right. This was necessary. She knew that. She really did. And yet, the face of that young man, no more than 19 or 20, stared up at her, caught between duty and death. Caught between life and those things that made us worthy of life. She hated it. With a loud grunt, she hauled herself up to the top of the night, grabbing onto the metal handholds built into its surface. With a few more effort-filled noises, she managed to get herself entirely off the chain ladder and onto the side of the war machine. From there, she was only a simple Noospheric command away from opening the cockpit and making her attempt. But she couldn't. Instead, she spun around, looking back down the ladder, heart racing as she rushed to check if the two guardsmen still clung below. To her shock, Farnes was holding tight still, a few stray blaster shots cruising up towards them, the sway of the ladder aiding only slightly in keeping the two of them, or perhaps just the one, alive.
Isn't there a way for the ladder to be hoisted up? Because Nerva activated the ladder to come down so that she can climb on it. So why can't the ladder be pulled up again?
She could detect no movement from Gala, but did not stop to think about it. The chain ladder did not spool up. In fact, it barely spooled down, working via a catch-release lock and gravity's own pull. To solve this, she grabbed the chain with her mechadendrite, deploying a four-pronged metallic claw to seize the ladder tightly. "Soldier!" she called down. Farnes looked up, his face that of abject desperation and misery. A blue blast smacked into his left shoulder, on the side grabbing the ladder, the flak armor there bursting away in a shower of fragments. He loosed a cry of pain, but somehow kept his grip even then. "Hold on for all you're worth!" Nerva called down to him. Biting her lip, she looped her arm around the metal handhold on the knight itself, hooking it with her elbow and bracing herself for the weight she was about to take on. With a loud, mechanical whine, the claw began to spin rapidly, the winding servos within the limb screeching as it pulled up against the weight of the ladder and the two bodies it held. Smoke was rising from the mechadendrite in no time, and soon sparks as well. She had never intended it to bear this much weight, or even to be used like this. She tried to speed it up, to reach them before the servos failed, but they only grew slower and slower instead. Red warning sigils appeared in her retinas, and sensations symbolizing the same messages began to fill her back and spine. Pain burst the artificial barriers of her neurovault, and she found herself screaming, clinging to the side of the knight as the segments of her mechadendrites began to splay and split apart.
Then a loud thunk from within the limb, and a sudden near collapse as it broke halfway down its length and ceased to reel them in.
Does Nerva feel pain from the mechadendrites, those appendages? Does she feel pain when they break apart, or, she's okay? Yeah, I'm just wondering about that.
Nerva bit down on her agony and looked at Farnes, eyes wide, frantic. "Climb! You have to climb!" she yelled. Farnes looked up, eyes wide, before he looked around, head swiveling as if he might find some other option, some method of escape. Both hands were occupied. How could he possibly begin ascending? She had no answer for him. The only answer she could see was clear. Drop Gala. Farnes seemed to know as well, and grit his teeth, face reddening. He roared, huffing and puffing as he began to straighten, pulling up with his other arm, his whole body trembling with the exertion. Nerva found her appreciation of basic, primitive flesh biology expanding as she watched the bellowing guardsman lift his comrade, pulling up and up until his elbow was over one of the rungs on the flexible ladder.
This is amazing. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Wow.
He slid it in and gasped, releasing the weight and allowing the chain to take the strain from his muscles. Then, panting and sweating all the while, he released his pained, stiff grip on the ladder and moved his hand up by one rung. All of that for one rung. It simply was not going to work. But Farnes tried anyway, breathing for a few moments as he got ready to slide his elbow back out from the rung that held it and force Gala's unconscious body up one more step. He nearly began his next attempt when a blue bolt sailed past, missing him and Gala, but striking the ladder. One side lost all tension, and Farnes cried out, swinging wildly on the remaining portion of the chain ladder. The swinging made Nerva grunt in pain as it pulled against her broken mechadendrite. Her arm and elbow ached, yet still she clung, watching the chain links that supported all of Gala and Farnes' weight weaken and begin to stretch. "You have to drop her! If you don't let her go, you'll both—" And then the chain snapped. Time died for a couple of impossible moments as the weakened link distorted and broke. Farnes' face was pain and fear and false hope, and before Nerva's very eyes, those things melted as possibilities ceased, and he fell. "No!" She screamed into reality and the new sphere both. In desperation, she moved without thinking, reaching her wounded arm out of her sling, reaching out with a limb of burnt servos and torn muscle. Immeasurable pain tore through her as she performed the act. That agony combined with the flood of razor sensations which flooded up and out from her now ruined mechadendrite limb. Darkness fed on her vision, and the light began to fade from the aspirant's consciousness, buried under a sudden avalanche of loss and agony. But
Nerva. Wow. I didn't know you had it in you, but here you are. Huh.
Denied it, and not through the use of her neurovault and augmentations. Something deep within her, something that had always been inside, woke then. It was not the first time it had done so. It had been with her always. A will, a power, a presence born of the human soul. It denied pain, it denied obstacle, and it denied failure. There was a loud noise, and all around her shook and quaked like a god shaking the foundations of the world. But she did not lose her focus, did not budge her sight from that face, that falling face that was on the verge of losing everything. And then she blinked, for the falling face was falling no longer. Gradually, as Gala and Farnes were raised up, reality reasserted itself in the Knight Aspirant's mind. Her eyes bulged in her skull, her ruined arm limp at her side as she watched the all-too-functional limb of the Knight Preceptor below her rise up. Both guardsmen held delicately in the center of its inactive Thunderstrike gauntlet. It reached Nerva,
becoming a platform for her, which she gratefully stepped down into, though it moved no further. Farnes looked at her with wide, barely coherent eyes. Nerva paused, grunting and groaning as she severed her auto harness, letting her broken and tertiary mechadendrites fall free of her. She sighed as the pain bleeding out from those places was replaced with still, soothing nothingness. What is this? I thought, the younger guardsman started to say as she came to him. A miracle. She hissed in a whisper. Take what you see before you, and know it as a miracle. Now stand, guardsman, and help me with her. We need to secure her.
Definitely is a miracle. Oh gosh.
To those handholds. There won't be room for her inside the cockpit. But she needs help. If I can get down, get us to Regin or a field kit, Farnes said, doing his part to get Gala up. There is nothing we can do for her more than getting her out of here as soon as possible. Besides, I can't put you down. I still need your help, Nerva said as they reached the handholds. She used the length of the chain ladder as the medium to secure the guardswoman in place, only able to manage it with Farnes' help. Their work done, she stepped back and looked at the guardsman next to her. Take off your flak, she ordered. What? Farnes asked. Nerva blushed slightly in spite of herself and pinged a reminder to restore her neurovault when this was all over.
You told him to do what? Can you say that again?
I told you I needed your help, didn't I? The reason she won't fit in the cockpit is because we are going to have to fit in there, together. So stop wasting time and get your armor off, she snapped. Me? My armor? Wait! I can't pilot a knight? Farnes babbled. Can you pull a trigger? Nerva asked. Theoretically? He said back, uncertain. Then, theoretically, you will have to do, she said, impatience riddling her voice. She turned around and waved her good arm, using the movement to enforce her command to the dormant, or perhaps not so dormant, knight. It responded, the cockpit above them sliding open with a pressurized hiss, green hollow light burning from within. She turned to face him and gestured towards her dangling, ruined limb. I can try to move this machine, to make it wake, to make it fight, she said to the bewildered guardsman. But without the use of my arm, specifically my trigger finger, I won't be able to do more than aim the last impulsor. So I need you in there to fire it when I tell you to, or we won't be able to scuttle the bay. Since I'm the only one who can even attempt to sit the throne mechanicus, you are going to have to sit on top of me, and I am not getting crushed under your flak armor. He blinked and nodded numbly, though he did not move right away. Nerva slapped her working palm lightly against her head. So what are you waiting for? Hurry up and take it off!
Man, this is so weird. Oh gosh, never. Wow.
Kambir felt like he was falling. He could feel his knees on the hard metal ground. He could feel the normality of gravity around him. He could feel that he was still and in place. But as he looked down at the partially covered body of his father, he truly felt as though he were falling. The dead had been pulled away and laid out on the side of the street, mostly to keep them from being trampled into paste by the Axiomites, who now surrounded the sealed bunker and tried ineffectively to break in. He had no idea how long this had been going on for. Minutes? Hours? He had lost all reference for time or the exterior world. He had never realized, not once, how many questions he had never asked his father. He had never realized, not even once, how much of his world was invested in his patriarch. And now, he was gone. This felt wrong, deeply wrong. This was not how the story was supposed to go. Yes, men died. They died all the time, especially in war, but not like this. Not with so much left unsaid. Not without any glory or meaning. But his father...
That's because war doesn't care about any of that stuff, you know? War will take you anytime, any place, with no reason. You will just die. You know? Sometimes a piece of shrapnel will just, hit you at the back of your head, and that will kill you instantly. And it will be seen as being unfair and, a death that's not honorable. You never faced the enemy. You never killed anyone. But because of that piece of shrapnel just striking you at the back of the head, it's over. It's over for you. Other people, they get transported to the battlefield before they're even able to get out of the vehicle or the aircraft. They get shot down from enemy combatants, and it's over. Those people are dead. Things like this happen. It's war. There's no chivalry code, or there's no heroic men and women. There's none of these fairy tales that we keep telling ourselves about war. War is terrible. It's unfair. It's cruel.
Father had not managed to fire his weapon even once before he was trampled. His ancestors' armor was still pristine, intact, and completely reusable. And Kambir hated it. How dare that armor outlive his father? How dare that armor succeed in defending itself and not his father within? He shuddered, he wept, and he released sounds he had never known he could make. Pathetic sounds, the sounds of a soul torn asunder. He was not the only one. Though in the minority, many had paused to identify the dead, and many had succeeded, and now found themselves in similar, crushing realizations. They wept, and they stood, or were silent, or collapsed. An explosion then, as one of the towers beside the bunker collapsed near to its street-level base and fell over. Blinking tears out of his eyes, Kambir looked up, seeing that the space around the smoking but intact bunker had been cleared. He vaguely remembered a voice speaking over the street speakers, warning people to clear the area, and now he could see why. Unable to breach the hard point with what they had on hand, they instead buried it, the tower pitching over and falling atop the squat building. A cheer went up from the crowd, a crowd that had continued to swell and swell, even as the young Axiomite mourned. Either destroyed by the weight, or trapped beneath it, the rebels congratulated one another, cheering and howling before they began to move, acting out the rest of the plan. Kambir did not know, but he felt like he hated them all as well. How dare they? This was no victory. This had been a massacre on their side, and many more Axiomites had died than Imperials. So why were they congratulating each other? Why were they cheering his father's meaningless death? He grit his teeth, but after a time, he sighed. What else were they supposed to do? They had won, even if at great cost. They had won. Now all that remained was to block off the road and hold it. Something he could already see would be greatly aided by the toppled tower, which had kept most of its shape and integrity, even laying sideways across the entire avenue. Sure enough, soon he and others had been asked to help reinforce the building, to help prepare for their interdiction. He did so, working listlessly, but effectively, as he helped to carry components, crates, and barricade materials from one of the lifts leading down further into the city to the tower they were fortifying. He still felt like he was falling, still felt despondence devouring him to protect him from sorrow and hatred. But when he spotted some of the men hauling in a large deflector shield array, his torrid thoughts were disrupted. It was not the shield itself that prompted the response, though it had drawn his attention. No, it was one of the sweating men struggling under its weight that so disrupted his dour curse. Samael. The man was there, near the back of the array, helping to lift it and obviously struggling less than the men around him. Samael had taken off his long coat and work shirt, tying both to his waist as he hefted the huge machine with the help of the others around him. He had an unlit tube of the same weed as before protruding from his lips, and he did not seem to notice Combeer until the Axiomite began to draw closer. The youth put down the crate he had been carrying and strode to the man, reaching into his pocket to retrieve the forgotten lighter. "Hey," he said as he came upon the older man, his voice sounding weaker than he had intended.
Hey, kid. Glad to see you made it.
Samuel grunted. "Yeah, I did." Combeer said, emotions obviously raw as he walked beside the man.
So, how you like the battlefield? Get any shots in?
He asked. Combeer did not respond, but nodded limply.
Make any difference?
The man asked. "Yeah. Shot, one of the 2 Republic ATs and destroyed it." The young Axiomite said, voice hollow.
Oh, feck. That was you? Hell of a shot. You got talent. A real sharp eye if that was not a fluke.
Samael said in a good-natured voice, but the compliment had no effect on the deepening lines the man could see forming on the youth.
Your father make it?
He asked more softly.
He injured?
Dead, Combeer said, and while Samael's expression fell instantly at the news, it was Combeer himself who was hurt most by the admission. Tears stung his eyes, but he did the best he could to hold them back.
Burnin'. Sorry, kid. That's battle. That's the risk we take every time we fight. Sometimes the fight chooses us, but sometimes we choose the fight, and we bear the burden of its outcome. It ain't fair, kid, but it's life.
Combeer knew the man's words were true, but that didn't help him feel any better about it. He gave a grudging nod and drew out the lighter, showing it to Samael. "You forgot this," he said, holding it out.
Hands ain't free yet, kid, but light me up,
the man said in response. Combeer did so, flipping open the lighter and putting the flame to the unlit end of the other man's cigarette. He never stopped, but he did take a deep drag of it, letting the smoke escape out his nose. They walked for a minute or so then, before either spoke again.
Hey, listen,
the man said.
You got the talent, kid, but you don't have the heart. This planet is about to go up in fire. One way or the other. We're just hoping it's still Axiom when the fire's clear. This is gonna be one hell of a fight, but it does not have to be your fight,
he said. Combeer looked up with wide eyes. How can you say that? This is my home. This is where
you and presumably your mother and father have lived all your lives, right?
He asked. The Axiomite nodded.
And that just changed,
he said, his words hard.
Win or lose, Combeer, you're never getting back what you had. Your father is dead, and death gives back nothing. Win this world, win this whole damn war, and it still won't give you back what you were trying to save. Keep fighting, and you may find yourself with a world of your own, but without the people you used to share it with.
And are you prepared for that to occur? Are you mentally prepared for that? Because I don't even think anyone can ever be ready for something like that.
That's what you want. Then fight with all you've got. But if you'd rather have your mother, or even yourself, over this world you've grown up on, then run, live,
he said. Combeer felt tears streaming down his face, felt sobs trying to push their way out of him.
Kid's got honor,
grunted one of the men beside Samael. The 2 others nearby nodded, heads red as they struggled with the weight of the shield. Combeer sniffed and nodded weakly. My father died for this, he muttered. The soot-stained man nodded his head, sweat dripping from his chin.
There is great honor in fighting,
Samuel agreed.
But there's equal honor in living. We fight for the living. We die for the living. Only fools fight for the dead. And if you could ask them, the dead would be the first ones to say it.
Combeer did not know how to respond to that, and before he could figure it out, Samuel spoke again.
Go, kid. Run. Get your mother, get a vessel, and get the hell out of here while you can. Collect your father and take yourselves away from this place before it takes any more away from you.
Coward! Growled the man to Samuel's left.
Hey, shut the hell up.
That kid killed one of those Imperial sentinels. Unless you were manning one of the rocket launchers, he's already done more for this fight than either of us. He's young, he's taken losses, and he's done enough.
The man growled at the Axiomite beside him.
Go, kid. Make sure your father gets buried, and make sure your mother doesn't.
Combeer found himself nodding his head, tears still streaming as he clenched his teeth behind his lips. But your lighter, I should at least... he started to say.
Keep it, in case I don't make it out. At least something of mine will. Now go,
he said, and Combeer did, turning and running back to his father. But he was not running away, he knew. He was running towards a different fight. Samael was right. He needed to save people, not the planet they lived on. And he had an idea about just how to do that. He was so consumed by the events that had happened, and the events he was planning to make happen, that the young Axiomite rebel failed to notice the distinct, double-headed aquila which graced the front of the lighter. He did not notice, nor could he even read the alien inscription engraved beneath those spread wings and borne talons.
Samuel is a... No way. So what, did he change sides? As soon as he landed on Axiom, he just changed sides? Wow. Wow, okay. Alright. I'm surprised, really, that this happened. Okay, Samuel.
There is no place for the weak-willed or hesitant. Only by firm action and resolute faith will mankind survive. No sacrifice is too great. No treachery too small. She's just a witch, Commander Bly was saying to his men. Nothing more than a clanker version of Asajj Ventress. We can beat her. We just need a plan and to execute it professionally.
What's up with all these people calling other people witches? I mean, you have the Astartes calling Jedi witches, and now you also have Commander Bile calling, what's her name again? Kali Delta a witch as well. Oh, wow.
He was above, standing on the turbolifts, the greater maintenance bays situated below him, and his clone troopers. The men down there were keeping the droid witch busy, while Bly plotted out and put together a dedicated plan. Now, with his men assembled, the plan created, and the pesky drone's skull that had been spying on him neutralized, they were missing only two things: morale and the proper munitions. Sir, with all due respect, whatever that thing is down there, it is much worse than Ventress ever was. It's tearing through us like carking paper, and we can't even touch her, said one of the clones. Others murmured agreement to that, but Bly shook his head. Not quite. You see, troopers, I figured out something about our dear tin can spinning around down there. She isn't using the Force, like the General or Ventress. She's using these, he said, indicating down to the inert skull he was resting his boot on. Every time we target these drones, she beelines it straight for whoever is attacking them. That gives us two things: a hint to how she is doing all this, and, more importantly, a reliable way of luring her into position, he explained. Some of the troopers nodded, punching gauntlets into palms and getting psyched up for the operation. Some, however, only slumped. Oh, we're all gonna die trying to make this work, said one. As he spoke, two ISP speeders and many, many more clones on jetpacks arrived, flying in through the holes in the walls and landing all around Bly on the turbolift. The crates were placed down, but Bly was smiling before he even opened them, seeing the weapons held already in the hands of the arriving clones. Maybe before, but not now, he said as he pulled forth the bulky form of a powerful electromagnetic pulse launcher. I doubt she's seen these yet. All right, everyone, stick to the plan. If we execute properly, she will not have a chance to react. Get your gear and wait for my mark, he said.
Soon after, the clone troopers of the 327th Star Corps lined up, stomping as they reached their formation of staggered ranks, Bly at their head. "Clones of the Grand Army of the Republic, to victory! Scramble!" Bly ordered, jets firing on all their packs as they took flight and curved down, propelled like missiles into the main chamber. The instant they entered, they were spotted and noticed by the zipping, spinning cloud of servo-skulls which moved around the ceiling, always vaguely over the head of the perverse droid priest. They split into 3 groups, and, as Bly had hoped, the creature of steel was thoroughly preoccupied with the clones she was killing at the moment. Ignoring his need to fly to their defense, he spun in the air and came down hard but safe on the designated position. He and his men tucking themselves into the nooks and crannies of the large, building-sized tank and the crawling tanks beside it. He looked around and, satisfied that they were all in place, reached up to tap his helmet. "We're in position. Commence the operation." In response, Group 2 flew between them, hovering as they took aim and then began to fire into the swarm of skull drones. They only managed to get a few shots off, but a few shots was more than was required from that many clones. Contrary to what their names suggested, the munitions of the EM pulse launchers was no solid round, no grenade or special bullet. Bly was unsure what it actually fired, but what it looked like was a sphere, easily the size of a man's head, if not larger, composed entirely of pure, crackling energy. The spheres were sent flying, traveling in straight lines and leaving trails of burning air in their wake. The skulls zipped and bobbed, moving around most of the pulse spheres that were sent after them. But the few that did strike true struck more than one. Upon impact, the containment field around the energy ball collapsed, releasing an explosive wave of alien electrical energy. Servo-skulls dropped in their tens with each strike, which was likely why the response to the attack came so fast, even faster than Bly had been anticipating. He had expected to have time to react, but however it was that she had launched herself, when the domina of the Martian priesthood came for them, she did so as a flying lance of lightning-fast, ferocious death, colliding with Group 2 before Group 1 could head her off and engage.
"Get on her! Stay on her! Group 3, take over!"
Bly calmed to his men, even as the clones around him spilled out from hiding to flank the priest. While he and Group 1 fell upon the metal menace, Group 3 would take over the pursuit of the drone skulls, who had to remain near, eyes always on the battle and on her, to provide their benefit. As they did, Bly and his men rained shots down, striking and electrocuting their own men as they attempted to pin her down and blast her. But their attempts were in vain. The woman, who was literally made out of blades, bent, folded, and jumped impossibly, staying just out of reach as she continued to cut through them wherever she could manage it. However, soon her movements grew more frantic, and Bly knew the reason. Group 3's attack was urging her to change targets, and the stubborn monster was insisting on killing them all here before she moved on. 2 near misses later from the new area of effect weaponry, and she abandoned the tactic, leaping from the ground onto the tops of the tanks as she began to dash for the clones pursuing her drone skulls. The men who had been facing her did not falter, taking to the air and chasing after the droid priest, forcing the quick death dealer to duck and swerve as she moved, breaking her beeline assault and frustrating her attempts to attack the clones she was after.
Survive, Commander Bile.
Group 2, break off now and prepare for the next phase. Group 3, change target priority on my mark. Bly calmed. He waited a few seconds, observing and hanging back as he tracked Kali's movements. She was moving and attacking, striking whenever possible, but her melee methods made that difficult so long as his clones kept their effective distances intact. Once she was on the verge of catching Group 3, he gave the order. Now! The clones in Group 3 spun around and scattered, now aiming for the domina and not her skulls. The priest spun past troops and blasts, men falling to pieces at her crossing, but her landing was less smooth, her plans confounded, and her skulls now more depleted than ever before. Simultaneously, what was left of Group 2 changed targets as well, now taking up the slack left by Group 3 and pursuing the rest of the drones.
I really hope you make it out of this. Your plan is working. Your plan is working. And, Kali Delta might target you. That's what I'm saying. I just hope you survive until she's defeated. Or maybe she's going to defeat you. I don't know. We'll see. But I'm crossing fingers.
Expected her to follow after Group 2 now, and was preparing to switch out Group 1 and 2 the way he had with Group 2 and 3. But she did not do as expected. Instead, the Domina shifted and began to pursue a different target altogether. Him! Oh, Scrog! He cursed, spinning in the air and taking off.
I just said, survive, my guy, survive, Commander Vile. Oh, gosh.
On me! He calmed as he began to fly, taking evasive action, but not leaving the chamber, knowing that she was trying to kill him or drive him out. He didn't bother to look back, knowing that he couldn't, knowing that slowing down for any reason, even for a second, was as good as dying right there and then. He wished he could see, and envied the vision the Domina must have used against him and his, fed by so many eyes that were not even her own. The thought sparked a desperate idea within him, and he keyed his comms to all the troopers in Groups 1 and 3. Everyone, tell me when she is a second from falling on me! He sent to them, flying and swerving for as long as possible. This insane plan would only work if he bought Group 2 enough time to clean up the drones. And so, without even knowing how close or necessary it was, Bly began to maneuver and fly like he never had before. Without ever slowing, he circled the room around them, both high and low, burning around metal beams and hanging chains, and jetting between the barrels of tanks and the legs of otter war machines. Then came the warnings, and as he had hoped, a few among the clones were early, which was what he needed, because he also knew that the Domina would be faster than expected. As the cries of his men filled his comm, he braced his weapon, aiming out but holding it close to his body, as if firing from the hip instead of from the shoulder, and spun himself again, turning onto his back and looking behind. He felt his bladder tighten in shock, for the Domina was truly right upon him, consuming his field of vision as she reached for him, wrapping bladed arms around his body. Luckily, he tightened more than that, squeezing the trigger of his weapon and blasting them both with a point-blank discharge of his EMP pulse launcher. They both cried out in unison, scorched by the blast and bizarre energies of the gun, arching out of the air and colliding with the ground, each landing separately. Even with the strength of her strikes stolen from her limbs, the blades had lacerated him, drawing red lines in his white armor, but not flaying him to pieces as had been the intention.
But don't they have, poison on them? Maybe? I'm hoping there is no poison on those claws. Yeah, I'm hoping.
Bly twitched and groaned, but rolled to his feet, expecting her to be upon him again. That did not happen, and he found the Domina laying in an almost literal heap on the ground, blades scattered all about. The scene confused him for a second, until he realized that she had actually literally been made mostly out of magnetically interlocking blades. Taking a breath and limping closer, Bly could see that only one of her arms was even legitimately connected to her torso, the other dissolving into edges and razors of varied shapes. She was still alive, flailing slowly on her back, like a droid running on a quarter power, though, ironically, she seemed more human now than ever before. She did have flesh. That much was now visible, as the scales of swords fell away to reveal the gray, sickly skin beneath, interwoven with tubes, wires, and cybernetics.
Is this the end for Magos Dominus, Kali Delta? Is this the end? Where is what's her name again? Nerva. Yes. I'm sure by now they're in the Imperial Knight, and they are, piloting it and heading towards where Kali Delta is. Hopefully. Yeah. Guys, I'm not really, supporting either Star Wars or Warhammer 40K. I'm on both sides. Sometimes I will support Star Wars. Sometimes I will support Warhammer 40K. I think I've said this before. Yeah. So if you think it's kind of weird that I was with Commander Bile, but now I'm with Magus Dominus, just know that I'm not really supporting one particular side. Yeah.
He came to stand over her, leveling the EMP pulse launcher down at the Magos, her eyes moving to meet his from behind her metal mask.
It seems I underestimated his planet.
She said in garbled but stabilizing speech. This planet, Bly said, feeling the burning cuts lacing his arms and back, is ours, witch!
No.
She said without hesitation. He stepped back slightly as she weakly raised her remaining limb and pointed up, past Captain Bly, to something above him.
This planet is theirs.
Bly thought the gesture to be her attempt at a distraction until a deafening mechanical roar fractured the surface of his visor, staggering him and the nearby troopers who had begun to land around him. He craned his neck, looking up and feeling terror seep into every part of his mind as a pair of bright, massive blue eyes illuminated a titanic face and stared down at him. He dropped his weapon and spun around, his men already taking off as the massive war machine bellowed again, beginning to take its first step forward. Bly tried to trigger his jetpack, but the control did not respond, shorted out by his own weapon. He tried to calm his men, but his helmet package was dead. He tried to scream out a retreat, but was crushed underfoot before he could finish.
Whoa. You know, I actually thought that Kali Delta was finished. I thought this was the end for her. But instead, it's the end for Commander Bile. Wow. No, but you tried, man. You really tried your best. You tried your best. Oh, wow.
They had been called to the fore, voxed into motion by the urgent commands of Commissar Shadrick, and without complaint.
Oh no, that guy? Ugh. Okay, let's hear what he has to say.
They had deployed. They marched in rank and file, silent and stalwart. They wore full-body suits, sealed environments each, every fourth man carrying a Volcus-pattern magma gun, a horrifying weapon which was very nearly unique to the Zektek sector. Though at brief descriptions, many may think of the feared death corps of Krieg, these men bore no kinship to the Vitae-born warriors of that dead world. The encompassing suits were made not of ceramite, nor of the chemically treated overlapping cloth as worn by the aforementioned death corps. Instead, they donned dull red, single-piece rubber-like plasmite suits, some of varying heights, but otherwise identical to the others around them. Bodies and faces utterly hidden, they marched, squeaking only slightly despite their vast numbers. Each rectangular head section was seamlessly connected to the one-piece suit, the man within wearing an interior helmet and rebreather which connected to and kept steady the large, box-like head section of the suit, which was sealed around the face with a square screen of hardened night glass. A basic heads-up display was projected onto the screen of each Imperial soldier by internal, neck-mounted holo-emitters they wore, showing orders, objectives, tactical maps and information, as well as ammo counts, IFF signals from their compatriots, and litanies of faith and fury specifically selected by the hand of their homeworld's current ecclesiarchal representative. And they did not march in the sun, but within the shadows of steel, backed up by dedicated mechanized support that was, as yet, unspoiled by fighting and fresh. The growl of Lehman Russ tanks and the rumble of a single, towering Baneblade resounded over the marching heads of the Stoic Legion.
Yeah, okay, it's not over. I think we're heading into round 3 of, the Battle of Axiom now. And, the Imperium of Man, they're just churning out more and more regiments, more and more mechanized units. More special forces are still incoming as well.
The wrath of the 666 Carcosan Untouchables had been unleashed.
Carcosan? Okay.
And around them flew the flags of the 44th Black Carminian Obsidian Guard. The dark, glittering banners crackled and clinked as they flagged in the wind, hung from every similarly painted tank, walker, and APC. While the Calambians were renowned across their sector as eccentric but effective warriors, the Carcosans and Black Carminians were nearly hated, and certainly feared. Both cursed Carcosa and the brutal sphere named Black Karma were death worlds with vast human populations. Visitors to either world often never left, and those who did always carried some foul aspect of those places with them when they escaped. And in this way, so too did every masked warrior within their hazmat-like suits, and every scarred driver and gunner within each darkened craft carry with them their homeworld's curse. Whenever deployed to restore the peace, these guardsmen brought silence instead, crushing and killing every last living combatant and non-combatant within their engagement zones. All too often, needy planetary governors would request the aid of either regiment, mistaking their precise drilling, silent fervor, and orderly ranks as signs of obedience, discipline. The truth is slow to reveal itself, and horrifying when it does. Butchery, methodical, habitual, and unceasing, even in most cases in the face of direct orders to the contrary. This was the stuff that defined the Untouchables and the Obsidian Guard both. And now, on the commands of a commissar who knew no mercy, they marched toward the Basilica of Salvation to bring damnation. Yet they were halted before they could reach their chosen location, stopped all at once, ceasing movement in an oddly inhuman unity. Before them, within a kilometer away, a spire had been collapsed into their path. Around it, on it, and from it, various barricades had been erected, and instead of being abandoned, the ruin was instead teeming with movement. Spotters and scouts moved up, and auspex lashed out with pulsating sensor sweeps, revealing an assortment of life forms, though predominantly human, armed with an even more varied assortment of weapons. The guardsmen who had been manning and defending the nearby relay station were strung up, dead and mutilated. Green and gray fatigues and armor dripping in red. They hung, gently waving in the wind, the clouds dimming the light of the sun and making the color of their distant blood less distinct. Seeing the Imperial forces halt from their distance, the ringleader, or at least their spokesperson, began to speak, his voice echoing from the howlers and broadcast speakers which lined the roads and buildings.
Let's hear the spokesperson. Oh gosh.
Hear me, Imperial scum. We are the Axiomite Guard, the true defenders of the Republic, and we have had enough. We have risen against your tyranny, and will tolerate your presence no longer. So hear and know this well. The Imperial lines rippled slightly as the unnamed speaker continued, soldiers stepping aside and making room for tanks to move forward, so they too could make room. The Bane blade ground up, squealing to a stop at the front of the foremost line. Beside it, Lehman Russ Eradicators began to line up as well. The ranting did not abate. If you choose not to leave, to approach, to come here instead, then know that you have come here to die. We are millions strong, and each of us is armed with a hero's weapon. Each of us a bloodline born of proud defenders. We beat the Hutts into submission and drove them from the core. We shunted away the Sith and sent them skittering back into darkness. The cannons of the massive war platforms groaned, enormous barrels tilting up as they took up firing angles. Orders were voxed, clearances issued, shells were blessed and then firmly loaded into waiting war machines.
Guys, retreat.
The Carcosans watched on silently, insectoid rebreather masks expressionless behind their glass screens. Ignore my warning at your own peril, Imperial fools! You cannot win! You cannot The Eradicator tanks opened fire first, the blasts cascading in sequence from left to right. Their shells were sent spiraling and screaming through the air, arching up and then down towards their targets. But they never reached the collapsed tower. A bubble, or shell, of radiant blue energy suddenly appeared, enveloping the fallen building and the rebels it contained. The shells slammed into the particle shields with muted, echoing thumps, their weaponized shockwaves visible as they were reflected away from the rippling blue skin of the shield. There was a pause, and then an echoing laugh from the speakers. Did you really think that we would simply stand here and speak without the power to back our statements? You are doomed, imps! You have no choice but to approach us manually and be cut to pieces by our... The boasting speaker was silenced a second time, though this time not by the booms of many Eradicator cannons, but rather the deafening roar of only one weapon. The Mega Battle Cannon turret which topped the Baneblade tank fired, even given the precaution of allowing the tank to come to the front of the line, ahead of the troops. The shockwave which broke out from the barrel upon its discharging still sent the nearest Carcossans reeling and toppling over. The scream of the fired shell became a sonic boom as it tore through the air with meteoric speed, propelled not only by the momentum of its initial blast, but from its powerful self-propelled solid fuel system as well. The bubble bent and flexed, holding the red-hot, spinning shell in place as it screamed against the energetic resistance. But the blue shield, though wavering, did not break, its elastic surface slowly pulling the shell back despite its velocity and...
They might actually make it then. Maybe. Let's see. Let's continue.
...and engine. Then, the rocket at the end of the shell ceased to fire, and less than a nanosecond later, the small nuclear charge held within detonated. The shield did not survive, and neither did most of the rebels sheltering beneath it. That fact did not forestall another 3 volleys from the Eradicators before the Carcossan Untouchables were sent forward once more.
Wait, so the speaker, what happened to him? Is he gone? No. I kind of like that guy. I liked that guy. I really did. Oh, wow.
Thick boots waded through pools of cooling, half-molten steel, shattered metal, and irradiated smears which once were bodies. Though silent and methodical in their advance, the Untouchables could barely constrain their disappointment, as they found the work of the Black Carminians to be as thorough and ruthless as they themselves sought to be. But their bloodthirst found elation as they passed beyond the destroyed remnant of the rebels' makeshift roadblock, only to find a second line of many, many, many more Axiomites. They raised their weapons and roared rage into the sky, firing haphazardly as they charged. The rain swept over the rebels, as if charging ahead to meet the Imperium, and the 666th advanced. They did not charge, did not move with greater speed than they needed. Instead, they took up positions, raised their weapons, and went to work.
Went to work. Oh, gosh. Okay, guys, that is it with Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40K episode 23, The Cost of Honor by A Fan With Too Much Time. Yeah, no, this episode was good. This episode was really interesting, with the battle between Kali Delta and all of those clone troops and Commander Bile, Commander Bile and his clone troops trying to figure out ways to defeat this witch, as they would call her. I don't know why I'm busy calling her a witch. She's no witch, but anyways, trying different methods in trying to contain her, throwing their EMP grenades at her, shooting at all corners and styles, and even having some what are they called again? Those vehicles, having strafing runs on her, and it just didn't work. It just didn't work because she has all of these servo-skulls hovering around her, and also analyzing the battlefield, making sure that all of this information is fed directly to her, and then she's able to make proper decisions on evasion and attacking the enemy. So yeah, she's been doing very, very well against all these clone troops. And then of course we also had Nerva and all the Imperial Guard regiment soldiers that were with her. I think there were like 4 of them at least. The sergeant was the first to go down. And he really tried his best. He knew he was going to die. He made sure that he would give time for his soldiers as well as Nerva to get to the Imperial Knight, and he overloaded his las gun. It exploded. It killed him. It killed the clone trooper who was standing above him, and yeah, he died a hero, I think. Making sure that Nerva and those Imperial Guardsmen and women can survive and try to get on board the Imperial Knight. Of course, when they tried to get on board the Imperial Knight, it was a very difficult situation, Some of them got shot in the back. I forgot her name, the lady who got shot in the back, the Imperial Guards lady who got shot in the back. I forgot her name. But yeah, I was still thinking maybe she's dead. I was really thinking that maybe this lady is dead. It's a lost cause. Let her just be left behind. But the other guardsmen kept to her, made sure that she was going to be with him and with Nerva aboard the Imperial Knight. He really tried his best, and yeah, that was amazing. That was really amazing to see that. And to hear him talk, like he's not letting her go, he's not leaving her behind here. He's going to take her with him aboard the Imperial Knight, and that was amazing. And then of course it gave that energy, that confidence to Nerva to also try her best to make sure that these guardsmen survive this ordeal. And all of them went on board the Imperial Knight. Of course, the guardsman had to take off his flak jacket and everything else, so that there's enough space, or not necessarily enough space. It's just that he will be sitting on top of Nerva, while Nerva is piloting the Imperial Knight. It will be the guardsman who will be using the weapons. So yeah, she didn't want him to have all of this bulky armor on top of her. He had to take it off. And that was quite interesting. And then we also had the civilians' perspective, if I could say that. The civilians of Axiom gathering up their weapons, their armor, and heading out to battle, organizing themselves, having a speaker, organizing things, giving direction on what's the plan of action. Yeah, that was quite interesting. And Combria and his father, joining up with this resistance militia group and, having a plan on disrupting the reinforcements of the Imperium of Man, destroying checkpoints, making sure that they make a blockade that is going to prevent anyone else from entering into the main battlefield. And they succeeded in doing that. They made that blockade, however, at great cost. A lot of civilians died. A lot of, should I say militia? I shouldn't just call them civilians now. They are, Axiom militia, men and women who are fighting for their homeworld. So yeah, Combria had a Ripper gun, yes, and it was an extremely powerful weapon. It's really something that should start being mass-produced by the powers that be in the galaxy, in the Galactic Republic. They should start manufacturing weapons like this. I think they should ask the Mandalorians, how do they do it? Can we please manufacture them, mass produce them? Because we're gonna need weapons like these for future battles, definitely. But after that battle, Combria found out that he lost his father, and Samuel, very interesting person, very shadowy person. It's only towards the end when he told Combria to keep his lighter, and on the lighter it had the Aquila, the two-headed eagle, and really I was so surprised to find out that there is an Imperial Guardsman who has turned coat, or who has left the Imperium of Man and has decided to defend Axiom, against his Imperium of Man former colleagues, if I can say that. That's amazing. I want to know more on his backstory. Why did he betray the Imperium of Man? Why did he desert the army? Why is he fighting against the Imperium of Man forces? Because he doesn't actually have to do that, but he is doing it. He's helping out. He's making sure that things are prepared for the defense of this new blockade. And here he's giving advice to Combria about fighting, that this war is going to be terrible, it's going to be harsh, your home is going to burn, but what's more important, your family or the planet? It's that kind of decision that he has to make, and neither one of them are right or wrong. It's how you feel at that moment. What are you prepared to fight for? What are you prepared to lose? What are you prepared to do to make sure that not only you or your mother survive this war? And when Samuel was like, the dead are not going to tell you to die for them, to die for what they have sacrificed for. They have done their part. And that's their contribution to fighting in this war. You have done your contribution in fighting this war. So you can either continue or you can leave. No one is going to judge you, especially the dead. They're not going to judge you. You've done your part. And I really did like that from Samuel. I just hope that Combria and his mother are able to leave the planet as soon as possible, because this war is not finished yet. Definitely it's not finished yet. We have 2 new regiments coming into action, the Carcosan regiment as well as the Obsidian Guard, looking very menacing and terrifying especially with their mechanized units, the tanks that they have on the battlefield. Crazy stuff. And now they've begun attacking that blockade that the civilian militia have created. So yeah, I'm just wondering how long will they last, you know, and will they have any backup from the clone troops, from the Jedi, you know, helping to shore up that defense and to push back these god regiments of the Imperium of Man. But yeah, things are bad. Things are really turning out bad for the Galactic Republic forces, and as well as the civilians, and or shall I say the militia on Axiom, because, you know, they're dealing with a force that, I've said this before, they're dealing with a force that is prepared to mow down civilians. They are prepared to kill everybody, you know, for victory. They won't stop just because you're a civilian. They won't stop just because you surrender. No. They will run over you with their tanks. They will shoot you with their weapons. And they will show you no mercy. And like what Combria's mother said, that you don't know these guys. You don't know the Imperium of Man. These people, they are terrifying. Yeah. But I'm sure, you know, the militia and everybody else, they are already figuring that out for themselves, that the Imperium of Man is not here to play around. This is no joke, and you must be prepared to die, because they are prepared. They've been prepared for a very long time. You know, they breathe in and out war. Yeah. Guys, that is it for tonight with A Fan Is Too Much Time. Remember, if you want to check out the original video as well as A Fan Is Too Much Time's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos. And I will see you guys next week. Oh yes, and I will be watching the After Talk video as well. So, you know, keep a lookout for that one. I think I'll put the card somewhere here. You'll see it. You'll see it for the After Talk. And I think I'm going to record that probably tomorrow, because it's almost time for load shedding, for the power outage, or blackout, I should say. Yeah. So probably I'm going to record that tomorrow. And yeah, guys, hopefully I'll see you for the After Talk as well. Okay? Good night.